Happy Easter. Good evening. I am the American Classic Harley Hughes. We've got a special presentation. It's only going to be about 5 minutes. We have the story of Easter, the Harley Hughes version of the story of Easter. So, again, this is not going to be safe for kids to listen to. I wish I was better behaved, but I'm lewd, crude, pierced, and tattooed. I always will be. Our story so far. So a bunch of gods are wandering through the heavens, and one decides to make a huge place and create a bunch of life and make a couple of humans. The humans get a bit rebellious. This god that created them, named Yahweh, without vowels, totally loses his shit, kicks them out of paradise, and then they go from newlyweds to parents. Point taken, eh? A few hundred years later, the Abraham starts hearing the voice of Yahweh in his head telling him to kill his son. Nosai Prex or Haldol back then, so he hauls his favorite child up a hill to murder him. But then Yahweh says, I'm the only God from now on, and don't kill your son. That would be crazy. A few hundred years later, after the whole cult of Yahweh is enslaved and forced to build pyramids with advanced mathematics and techniques that exceed the technology at the time, like creating Netflix when you still had a 26K modem and AOL's free trial, one of the members' sons ends up being adopted by the guy who owns the whole nation of Yahweh worshippers. Exodus, which is 40 years of wandering through a desert or 2 days in New Jersey without your wallet. Then a few guys who hear voices talk about a coming savior and God's people getting back into Eden. A few hundred years later, a guy named John runs out of the woods screaming that the anointed one is here. He gets his head chopped off. Must have been a big deal because the Romans did a lot of beheadings, and this one made it in the historical record. Christ comes, the religious people hate him, the sinners love him, and he doesn't judge anybody and adopts the whole servant leadership approach to forming a cult. The religious people rat the savior of mankind out to the government publicly and very brutally executes him, and his followers bury him in a cave sealed with a rock. And now, Headless Clown Radio presents the story of Easter. 3 days after Jesus' body is interred, his followers go to steal his corpse. Yes, there's a plot hole here, but don't ruin a good story with facts. Turns out the body is already missing. Then a man walks up to one of Christ's followers, and while she doesn't recognize him for a minute, it is Jesus. He may have had a haircut or lost some weight. People can change when they die. Jesus turns into a giant, or flies up in the air, depending on which translation, and gives some of his last great advice. And then the flowers start blooming, and bunnies copulate and lay chocolate eggs in clever hiding spaces for kids to find. Your food for thought. The story is wonderful and has many great lessons and good life advice, but let's stop pretending that it was some high-level Chris Angel shit that made Jesus worthy of worship. The words he spoke, his message, is the only thing that brought value to the messenger. He was a kid among a family of 10 or so whose dad worked with his hands. He knew what it was like to be hungry. Remember that while you're sitting with your belly full of Easter dinner. He didn't want people to hurt or to be sick or to suffer in any way, and he tried to show them how to change that. He said, love one another as I have loved you, and what you have done for these, the least of my brothers, you do also to me. He didn't harp on sin too much, and mainly just pointed out that no one's perfect. He said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, and then he himself didn't throw a stone. He ate with the members of society the religious people cursed and spit on. He washed the feet of his followers when they were arguing about who was the greatest. So again, to put it in its basest terms, you want to honor Christ, try not being an asshole. That's your food for thought. Your food for sex? Urban mushroom risotto with grilled asparagus. Look up a recipe, cook it together. Very romantic. Easter is a holiday for the goddess of fertility, so get the sheets wet tonight, and if the underside of the mattress needs a towel, you don't have to ask, was it good for you? So, relationship goals.